On the night I turned 18, I was sold to the most powerful man in the city. They said he was just a cruel billionaire, used to buying everything and everyone. But when they took me to his mansion, I realized something was wrong. Too many guards, too much silence, and golden eyes watching me in the darkness. I didn't know yet, but that man was hiding a secret capable of destroying not only my life, but the entire world. My heart beat as if it wanted to tear through my ribs. With each step I took, escorted by men who had no faces, only shadows, I felt that the mansion ahead was not just a house, but a gate to another world. A world from which I would never return the same. The iron gate creaked open, revealing gardens that looked more like a living cemetery. Ancient trees, whose branches twisted like hands trying to escape the earth, lined the stone path. And each lamp lit seemed too dim, as if the very light feared what lived inside. The silence was so deep it swallowed even my thoughts, and the closer I came to the main door, the more I felt I was entering a place that rejected the very idea of hope. The breeze smelled of metal and rain, and in the distance, a broken howl seemed to pierce my bones like a warning I could not decipher. "Enter," ordered one of the men who escorted me, his voice harsher than the cold wind of the night. I wanted to refuse, I wanted to run, but my father's debts bound me more tightly than any chain, and before I could react, I felt the weight of the gate closing behind me, sealing my fate. I was trapped in a contract I had never signed. Trapped with the man everyone called Alpha, though no one dared explain what that truly meant. The mansion's hall was far too grand to be human. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like dead stars, illuminating carpets so thick they muffled the sound of footsteps. There were massive portraits on the walls, men whose eyes seemed to follow me, ancestors who carried the same mark in their gaze, that golden glow that was not natural. It was a warning, a reminder that I was not standing before an ordinary family, but a lineage that had hidden secrets buried for centuries. Each shadow cast along the walls seemed to have its own will. At times I swore I saw the frames tilt slightly, as if they wanted to whisper a warning no one dared to say aloud. I should have felt honored, perhaps. After all, many girls in the city dreamed of being noticed by him. They said that just one look could change your life forever. But there, before the cold that pierced my bones, I could only think of one thing. Why me? Why, among so many women, was I chosen to be delivered to the most feared billionaire in the country? The answer burned deep in my mind, but it was still beyond my reach. There was something in that invitation disguised as a sentence. Something that made my skin shiver, as if I sensed that his choice had nothing to do with desire, and everything to do with destiny. I remembered my father's small shop, the empty shelves, the night when the men came with papers and cold smiles. "Business is business," they said, and left on the counter an indecent proposal wrapped in the promise of forgiveness. My father cried in secret in the storage room. I heard him, and in that silence, I accepted guilt that wasn't mine. Then the footsteps came, slowly, calculated. I lifted my eyes, and there he was, tall, imposing, wrapped in a dark suit that seemed sewn into his skin. Broad shoulders, a jaw marked by an old scar. His face, too beautiful to be human, too cruel to be just a man. But it was his eyes that trapped me, golden, intense, like solid fire burning in the dark. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. It was like staring at a precipice, knowing the fall had my shape. "You belong to me now." The voice wasn't loud, but it tore through my skin like a contained thunder. Warning, sentence, oath. Even without touching me, I felt invisible chains tightening around my chest. I tried to answer, but my voice broke. It was as if the air had been stolen from my lungs. "Breathe," I ordered myself, and only then realized my hands were trembling. He advanced slowly, each step a war drum. When he stopped before me, the air grew heavy, almost solid. The heat of his presence was not human. It was something more, something that watched me not only with eyes, but with instinct, as if I were prey and he the predator. "Do not fear what you see," he murmured, almost reading my thoughts. "Fear what you do not yet know." The words cut through me like thin blades, leaving invisible wounds that burned more than real steel. I closed my eyes for an instant and saw memories. the smell of coffee in the shop, my father's footsteps at dawn, the fear of losing our home. When I opened them again, the portrait seemed to have drawn a little closer. "This house has rules," he said, turning to the ancestors on the walls as if awaiting their approval. "And those who break them pay a price they cannot endure." The certainty in his voice was not theatrical. It was experience. How many had already paid? How many souls had been silent offerings to keep that empire untouched? My stomach churned. The ground felt firm and cold, and at the same time unstable, as if I were standing over a liquid secret ready to emerge. The words stuck in me like hooks. What rules? What price? What happens to those who dare defy? Why, in the midst of terror, did part of me feel a shiver that wasn't only fear, but something deeper, dangerous, forbidden? It was as if my soul, against all logic, was drawn to what it should hate. Maybe because hatred has a thin thread tied to fascination. Maybe because deep down, I already knew he hadn't chosen me by chance. A gust of wind swept the corridor, stirring the heavy curtains. Candle flames flickered, and for a moment I swore I saw shadows shaped like fangs across the walls. Before I understood, I heard a sound, not human, a low, deep growl from the depths of the dark hallway. I froze. The servants remained motionless, trained to ignore the impossible. But I heard it, I felt it. Something was there, breathing heavily, waiting. The walls pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't the clock's. It was a heartbeat that wasn't mine. My gaze returned to him, and the golden glow in his eyes blazed like stoked coals. He tilted his head, studying my fear as if tasting it. Then, with a smile that never reached his eyes, he said, "Now you know why they all call me Alpha." I should have fallen to my knees. I should have begged. Instead, something inside me rose, a defiance I didn't know I carried. I trembled, but I stood. The clock kept still. And yet, the door behind me slammed shut with a crash that made my body tremble, but it wasn't the impact that took my breath away. It was the sharp sensation that, by crossing that threshold, I had stepped into a territory where human logic was not welcome. The sound reverberated through the corridors as if every stone of the mansion carried the memory of what had been promised there: loyalty, silence, blood. The air had weight, density, the smell of metal and something ancient, like damp books forgotten in basements that hadn't seen light for decades. My hands were cold and damp, and my steps faltered for a moment, as if the floor had tilted slightly to push me back. But I had nowhere to return. The clock on the wall, which I would have sworn was frozen before, now ticked seconds in beats that weren't of time. They were the beats of a heart that wasn't mine. He walked ahead, needing no words. The house spoke for him. Heavy tapestries muffled strange currents of air. Very old doors bore claw marks, and on the ceiling, circular marks, as if chains had once swung there, and I didn't know if they held chandeliers or people. At every corner, a new kind of silence. The one that watches, the one that judges, the one that begs you to shut up to hear what you don't want to hear. I obeyed against my will. And in that silence, I discovered that fear has layers, and the first one is always the shallowest. He never looked back to see if I followed. He didn't need to. His presence pulled me like a tide, and I found myself marching to a rhythm that wasn't mine, but that my bones recognized anyway. Behind a double door, the hall that would haunt my dreams. A vast rectangle, high ceiling, lit by the moon slicing through dark-stained glass. At the center, an immense table, old in a way that wasn't age. It was use. My eyes spoke before my hands. Someone had fought here. Not two, not a barb roll. Something ritualistic, calculated, repeated. Along the wood, the marks were arranged like writing that my skin deciphered first. 3 parallel scratches, deep, repeated, in places where hands would press to rise or collapse. I didn't touch. Still, I felt the cold coming from inside the oak, as if the table had lungs. "This is the Hall of Pacts," he said, and I couldn't tell if the echo came from the room or my chest. Here destinies were sealed, blood was spilled, and oaths were never broken without cost. I tried to voice what burned inside. So I am an oath? The question left me smaller than I intended, but it flew between us like a wounded bird. He tilted his head, and for a second, I saw something in his face that wasn't cruelty nor compassion. It was recognition. "You are an answer," he corrected. And the verb cut me with the weight of someone who had spoken this dialogue dozens of times with mouths that weren't mine. My father appeared whole in my memory. The tired eyes, the shoulders that learned to carry sacks of flour as if they were guilt. The night he signed something he never read. "Your father asked for time," the Alpha said, without my asking. "And he got it. Your father asked for protection, and he received it twice over. No one touches what is mine." The word mine was a circle drawn around everything that breathed in fear. I knew, before knowing, that the contract binding us had nothing to do with money. It was a blood mark on a page that accepts no erasures. At the back, voices low, like prayers that had given up on God. I couldn't identify words, only the cadence of something recited for generations. I stared at the empty chairs and felt presence. Because emptiness in houses like this is never empty, it is waiting. He knocked twice on the table, and the sound ran like an animal under the wood. "Come." Not an invitation. A command. We crossed the hall, past columns that still bore scratches, and entered through a narrow door that seemed built to strip us of everything unnecessary. The corridor beyond was colder, narrower, and more watchful. The torches burned with discipline, and the air carried that metallic taste that sticks to the roof of your mouth. Iron, copper, memory. At shoulder height, grooves etched the wall. Not random, not in pairs. 3, always 3. Sometimes lower, as if hands had fallen. Sometimes higher, as if someone had been lifted before being restrained. I didn't stare long. Not out of cowardice, out of survival instinct. He stopped before a door with no hinges. He placed his palm on the wood and waited. He didn't turn a handle. He just waited, and the door gave way, not with a click of mechanisms, but with a sigh, as if what was inside wanted to see me too. Inside, a low ceiling, shelves crammed unbearably tight with boxes, amber jars with black caps, books whose spines were too worn to keep their names. At the center, a glass dome sheltering a dark ring, irregular, as if forged from stone that had bled to become metal. The thing pulsed, not showy, but a faint, stubborn beat, like something clinging to life. I wanted to ask whose it was. He answered before I could. "It belongs to no one. It belongs to a promise." I don't know if I raised an eyebrow, but he continued. "Some things are not used. Some things are remembered." I walked to the shelves as if stepping on a minefield of history. A leather-bound notebook called me like it knew my name. I opened it at random, and chance laughed at me. Diagrams of constellations my teachers never mentioned, lines tracing routes across the sky that seemed like escape maps, but were maps of return. Seals, signatures, dates from centuries the city pretended to forget, and names. Many names. Some slashed so violently the knife cut into the next page. Others repeated 5-7 times, as if rewriting a destiny was enough to change it. "Family trees?" I asked. "Paths," he corrected. "Some worked. Others cost too much." I should have demanded an explanation, but I understood the lesson the house gave me. Genealogy is when you search the past. A path is when the past searches for you. The question cracked out of me. If what you are reveals itself with the moon, why bring me now? He smiled short, like someone who knows something he won't share fully. "Because some things cannot wait, and because this house also answers to you." The sentence seemed insane until a torch to the left flared loudly, as if a word had been spoken without a mouth. Panic came in waves, and in the middle of it, a curiosity I'd be ashamed to admit in another life. I moved, and the air moved with me. Not a trick, a response. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall mirror covered with dark fabric leaning against a column. I took half a step. "No," he said. With such authority, my body obeyed instantly. "Some things only reveal themselves when you are ready." And when will I be ready? When you stop asking why you were chosen and start asking why you were remembered. The word remembered vibrated in my bones like a violin string. We left that room carrying nothing in our hands and everything on our skin. The corridor now seemed narrower, as if the house, satisfied with what it had shown, wanted to hurry us to the next act. The sound waiting for us was no longer the clock. It was the brushing of fabric, the scraping of chairs, restrained breaths. When we returned to the Hall of Pacts, the chairs were occupied. Men in impenetrably sober suits, women in dresses that smelled of inheritance and secrets. All with the same glint in their eyes, an amber, dangerous, ancient glow. In strange unison, they placed their hands on the table, each on a spot marked by habit. I felt, painfully clear, that I had arrived late to a story already being told without me. "Council," he announced, and the word had the texture of stone. No applause, no bows. An older man, voice firm, hands trembling just enough to betray too many years of command, spoke first. She heard the howl. The gazes cut me with the delicacy of blades. "I did," I replied, before my caution begged for silence. The old man nodded, not in approval, not in reproach, but as if confirming a number in a calculation. "Then time has found us." The Alpha remained standing, asking for no chair, no veil, no absolution for what he would say. "There are debts paid in coins," he declared, "others with names, and there are those that demand presence." I thought of my father, and knew with certainty that some night he too had stood in that hall, with empty hands and heavy eyes. "Does she know the rules?" a woman asked, her voice sharp as glass. "Does she know that asking is breaking the first one?" The hall laughed without sound, as if humor here had to be inhaled, not heard. "I know that I'm alive," I answered, "and that I was brought." It was enough to turn attention into appetite. The Alpha lowered his voice, intimate but not tender. "You asked for clarity." I thought I had, or screamed it, or dreamed it. He continued, "Clarity is risk in this place, but I'll give you what this night can bear." And he turned not to me, but to the table, to the wounded wood that had heard too many promises. "There is something in this city that chose us as gates. We open and close what cannot cross alone. When we fail, the city bleeds." The old man lifted a chalice. The liquid inside gleamed with copper reflections, and something in me recognized it with a shock that wasn't logical. The entire hall tilted slightly, like a ship in discrete seas. "You think you are here because of human debts," the Alpha said, looking through me. "But there is another account. Not gold, not silver. It is old, passed from father to daughter, even if neither signed it by hand." I wanted to deny it, but the word died before birth. "How can I owe what I never bought?" He cut me with surgical delicacy. "You inherited the wrong question." Silence. I breathed, like learning all over again. And it was in the end of that breath that I realized the torches burned brighter near me than on the other side. The house was answering. The Alpha spread his hand over the table, and old scratches aligned with his shadow. "Do not fear what you see," he repeated a version of the warning from the hall. "Fear what you do not yet know." I wanted to say I already feared enough, but the truth was that this fear wasn't like other fears. It didn't paralyze me. It woke me. Suddenly, a deep sound shook the walls, as if the mountain the mansion rested on had coughed. No one moved. The old man smiled for the first time, a smile of surrender. "It has begun." The Alpha leaned down, close enough for only me to hear, and whispered, "You will walk through that door and see something that will change everything. But understand, once seen, it can never be unseen." My stomach revolted. My legs wanted to stay. I went. We walked to a door I swore hadn't been there before, flush with the stone, no frame, no hinges. His touch was the key. The cold inside kissed my face with intimacy. I stepped, and the world shrank, as if I had been placed inside a jewel. Shelves lined with things I wouldn't name even under threat. Small bones carved into charms, maps disobeying known geography, clocks without numbers that moved sideways. vials with particles that rose when I exhaled and sank when I held my breath. At the center, a circle of dark stone with 12 marks. Not hours, but phases. The Alpha didn't enter. He stayed on the threshold, as if an old boundary barred him. "Alone?" I asked, not hiding the plea. "You haven't been alone since—" "The first question you asked," he returned, "the precision of a truth no one likes. What I saw in that circle doesn't fit in a sentence, and perhaps that was the only mercy the night allowed me. I can tell you enough. A shadow poured out of the stone like ink spilled in water and took the shape of something that knew my old name, the one no one calls, but that echoes when we are born and when we die. I stepped back and found the floor wouldn't let me flee. The shadow wasn't his, wasn't mine, wasn't the house's. It was from what had chosen us as gates. And for an instant, long as the years of the world, the shadow bowed its head, not in threat, in recognition. My knees weakened, but I didn't fall. Behind me, the Alpha breathed like someone who also saw, though he couldn't enter. "Now you understand why there is no return," he said. And I, who wanted every explanation, found only one question, the most dangerous of all, crawling out of my mouth. If this thing recognizes me, what exactly am I to it? This is where it all begins. The narrow corridor that opened before me seemed to breathe. The walls were so close I could feel the cold marble seeping into my skin, as if they wanted to drain my warmth away. Behind me, the door had already vanished, swallowed by the mansion itself, and the only path left was forward. Each step echoed with a strange delay, as if the sound were repeated by something invisible walking at my side. I was not alone, even if I couldn't see anyone, and deep down, I already knew that. With every meter, symbols began to emerge on the walls. They weren't ordinary carvings. They were ancient markings, etched so deep they seemed to burn beneath the stone. Runes, perhaps, or the letters of a forgotten language my body recognized, but my mind could not translate. My fingers tingled as I passed by them, as if some part of me were being summoned. The house was not only watching me, it was testing me, as if waiting for a reaction, as if it wanted to know if I was worthy or just another piece to be discarded. At the end of the corridor, a double door loomed, taller than all the others I had seen. Carved into it was the image of a wolf with bared fangs, its stone eyes following me. When the Alpha approached, the wood trembled, and for an instant, I swore the wolf blinked. He placed his hand upon the carving, and the doors opened with a thunderous sound that vibrated in my stomach. Beyond lay a circular hall, much larger than the Hall of Pacts. The ceiling stretched so high, it was lost in darkness, and in the center stood a ring of black stones, arranged like the remnants of some ancient temple. Around them, torches burned with an unnatural bluish flame, each one stinging my skin like ice. In that circle, the air was different, heavier, denser, carrying centuries of unspoken voices. And there I understood, I was not just a guest. I was the offering. "This is the circle of revelation," the Alpha said, his voice deeper within the chamber. "Here no lie survives, not even the one you tell yourself." He guided me gently into the circle, but the sensation was like passing through an invisible wall. The air shifted again, and I felt as though millions of eyes had opened around me, though no one was there but him. My heart pounded, and for a moment I thought I would faint, but something, a force I couldn't comprehend, kept me upright. The stones began to glow one by one, slowly, until a ring of blue light encircled me. My feet grew heavy, as if rooted to the ground, and no matter how hard I tried to move, I was contained there. "Why me?" I finally whispered, the words escaping like a desperate breath. Why, among so many, was I chosen? The Alpha watched me, his golden eyes shining brighter than the torches. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly until he stood just steps away. "Because you weren't only chosen," he said, each word falling like a weight. "You were marked, long before you were born." The ground seemed to spin beneath my feet. A memory struck me, sharp as lightning. My mother, still young, cradling me as a baby on a stormy night. Her lips murmuring words I didn't understand, but they twined with the same runes carved along the corridor walls. I shouldn't remember. It was impossible to remember. But I saw it, and in seeing, I felt something awaken inside me. The stones around me began to vibrate, emitting a low, deep hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The air thickened, hard to breathe, and yet I didn't want to escape. Part of me wanted to know how far this would go. Part of me wanted the truth, even if it was a truth capable of destroying me. The Alpha raised his hand, a gesture heavy with both authority and promise. From this moment on, you are no longer merely the daughter of a man in debt. You are the heir of a pact. And this pact... He paused, and for a fleeting instant, I saw pain in his golden eyes. This pact will cost more than you can imagine. A roar tore through the chamber, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The torches bent, as if something enormous had just passed among them. And for the first time, I realized I was not only being watched, I was being judged. The stones around me took long seconds to quiet after that roar. The echo dragged itself along the walls and ceiling, as if the mansion had lungs of its own, breathing with me. I felt the ground vibrating, not like an earthquake, but like a massive heart buried beneath the earth. The Alpha watched me in silence, unmoving, his golden eyes burning like embers that needed no air to exist. I wanted to speak, to ask, to demand answers, but every word died before leaving my lips. It was as if the very air warned me, "Be careful what you dare to name in here." Then, out of nowhere, one of the torches went out. The blue flame extinguished with a whisper, and darkness swallowed part of the circle. My skin prickled instantly. Something moved there, not outside the circle, but inside, with me. I felt a presence brush the back of my neck, a breath that wasn't mine. "Do not look back," the Alpha said firmly, and only then did I realize I had already begun to turn my head. What you feel is the shadow of what has chosen you, and shadows do not like to be stared at before their time. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air dissolved into liquid iron inside my lungs. The stones began to pulse again, faster now, more urgent, as if they were responding to the fear overtaking me. And then I heard, not with my ears but with my whole body, a name being whispered. My name. Not as humans pronounced it, but as if it were the original echo that preceded every version. My knees buckled, and for a second I thought I would fall. But something unseen held me up, invisible hands that would not let me touch the ground. The Alpha stepped closer, without crossing the barrier of the circle, and his voice filled the chamber. "Now you understand. You are not only a daughter, not only an heir. You are a link. The blood you carry does not belong only to you." I wanted to deny it, to scream that it made no sense, that I was only a girl sold to settle debts. But inside me, the memory of my mother whispering in the storm returned like a blow. This was no invention. It was a mark, a destiny. The torches flared again all at once, and the bluish flames turned golden for an instant. And in that instant, I saw it. Behind the Alpha, projected on the wall, the shadow of an enormous wolf, larger than any living creature, lifting its head to howl. But no sound came. Only silence. Silence so absolute it hurt. The Alpha did not turn to face the shadow. He simply closed his eyes, like someone recognizing an old enemy or a god before whom there is no resistance. "It came because you stepped into the circle," he said, almost in a whisper. "And that means your life is no longer only your own." My hands shook. I didn't know if it was from fear or from something far more dangerous, fascination. Because even terrified, part of me wanted to know who or what was calling me. The Alpha opened his eyes and fixed them on mine. The choice has not yet been made. But with every breath you take in here, you draw closer to the point of no return. The stones shone brighter, almost blinding. And in a movement that didn't seem human, the Alpha raised his hand, and the shadow behind him moved in response, as if it were his extension. Only I knew it wasn't his, not completely. It belonged to something that used his body as a bridge. "You have two options," he said, his voice deeper than ever. "Accept what calls you, or resist until it comes to claim you itself." Before I could answer, the ground within the circle cracked, glowing lines spreading like roots. And from the center, a golden light rose, so fierce it burned my eyes. But I didn't close them. I couldn't. Because there, in the heart of that light, something was forming. Something made of both shadow and radiance. Something that knew me. The golden glow rising from the floor seemed to climb through the lines of my palm and thread itself along the veins of my wrist until it knocked on the door of my heart. And there, like a patient guest, it waited to be admitted. I should have been terrified, but terror is a blunt blade when something older and softer presses against you. Between vertigo and dread, there was a warmth that felt unreasonably familiar, like the memory of a fire whose ashes you carry in your pocket without knowing. I realized, very simply, that the circle was no longer a courtroom. It was a threshold, and he was not only the judge of what would cross it. He stopped at the boundary as if he had been born there, a history of refusal resting in his shoulders. And then something changed that I felt before I saw. Not the house, not the shadow, not the rules, him. The gold in his eyes softened from metal to sunrise. He reached because I stumbled, and the moment his hand met mine, the circle breathed, a low, consenting sound that seemed to come from the stone itself. Heat ran up my arm and settled behind my ribs. The world quieted around the small fact of our skin. He did not haul me to him. He held me where I was, as if the distance itself were part of the touch. I knew then, with a certainty that startled me, that I was not only being judged here, I was being chosen. You feel it too, don't you? He asked, voice deep but near, as if he feared to disturb the glass-surfaced silence around us. I wanted to deny it and found that my pulse had already confessed. I don't know what I'm feeling, I said, and even the lie tried to sound like truth. The corner of his mouth lifted, not triumph, not mockery, recognition. That is what frightens you, he murmured, because it isn't only yours, it is ours. The word ours slid into me like a key into a lock that had been sleeping for years, and something within me turned, patient and inevitable, as if it had been waiting only for the correct hand. The circle's light steadied. The shadow at the far wall stilled like an animal deciding not to hunt. From somewhere I could not name, some corridor of memory, there came the smell of rain on old stone, of warm fur, of night air under pine boughs. None of those things were present, and all of them were here. He stepped forward, and the boundary did not protest. On the contrary, the stones brightened, a ring of steady breath around our feet, and the thickness of the air thinned to a silk I could move through. My hand fit in his with the alarming ease of a habit I did not remember learning. I tried to pull back. He did not allow it, but there was no violence in the refusal, only steadiness. You think you were sold to me? He said, his thumb brushing the ridge of my knuckles with the care one gives a relic. But you were delivered to me. There is a difference. A contract uses ink. A promise uses blood. The sentence made the skin at the base of my neck tingle, as if an invisible script were being read there. There was something binding us long before your father signed anything, long before your mother stood at the window with you in her arms and learned the words she did not want to remember. I felt the world tilt, not as a threat, but as a correction, the way a compass needle fixes itself on north after a long, confused turn. He lifted our joined hands as if measuring weight. A pale line crossed his wrist, an old scar like a silent rope under the gold of his skin. He turned his arm so I would see it fully. I made this mark the last time I swore I would never call anyone mine again, he said, and the calm in his tone sounded like fatigue instead of pride. I kept the vow until tonight. The admission struck like lightning and dry wood, quiet first, then a slow, devouring fire racing along my edges. Somewhere in the mansion, something old replied with a low creak, the sort of sound timber makes when it remembers the forest. The blue flames of the torches began to honey, and for a heartbeat, I saw not a hall, but a clearing lit by a moon that had not yet been named. The air smelled of wet stone and something wild, and the quiet between us stretched into a bridge. He stepped closer, the boundary forgotten or broken or rewritten by the fact of my hand in his. The torches softened from blue to honeyed amber. There are rules, he said at last, but some rules were written by fear to protect itself. They keep enemies out. They also keep miracles out. He did not lean to kiss me. He simply stood close enough that my body remembered every place it was empty and imagined where his would fit. The house listened like a stern parent pretending not to listen. Even the shadow waited, its head lowered, not in threat but in a kind of wary courtesy. "Look at me," he asked, placing 2 fingers lightly beneath my chin. I obeyed, and Power's polish peeled back for a moment. The fine fatigue at the edge of his eyes, the ghost of a laugh line that had not been used in years, the small, almost invisible tremor that visited his mouth when he breathed my air. "I waited a very long time," he said, "and each waiting taught me a new kind of restraint. But restraint is not absence. It is a promise that has learned to hold its breath." My name moved through the chamber again, the old version, the first music of me. And instead of pulling me away from him, it drew me nearer, thread to needle. I let it. I did not know that I could allow anything here, and discovering that I could felt like finding a window in a room I thought was sealed. "Show me your truth," I said, and the steadiness of my voice startled me. He did not hesitate. Shadow moved along his shoulders like a cloak. His pupils narrowed to wild coins. Beneath his skin, something older shifted. A shape that would not fully surface because he would not let it. Not here, not to frighten me. The beast did not erase the man. It completed him. I did not step back. I leaned forward by the width of a breath, and the circle brightened, not to warn us, but to write us into the floor. "If I touch you," he said, "I do not know if I can stop when the house demands I stop." The house heard its title and the torches flared, but I shook my head. "For once," I said, "let the house listen to us." I guided his hand to my cheek and learned that warmth can have a gravity. The heat of his palm was not heat only. It was recognition, like the body finally hearing its own name. A sound from far away advanced along the bones of the mansion, the skitter of many feet, the collective hush of a crowd schooling itself into obedience. The practical world was returning, relentless as debt. He did not truly look away from me. He only measured the angle of danger. "They will come," he said. "They always do when something honest happens." "And what is this?" I asked. He answered with a simplicity that touched the oldest part of me. "This is honest." The words settled in my ribs like a new room built where there had been only wall. I understood in that instant why fear writes rules, to keep houses standing. But sometimes you need a doorway more than you need another wall. The circle flickered. The shadow kept its distance, as if even it understood that there are thresholds one does not cross without invitation. "If I take you from here now," he said, voice lower for my ear alone, "others will decide for us what we meant in this room. If I leave you, they will write it anyway. Either way, they will write." "Then let them write," I answered, surprised at how steady I sounded. "But they will not write the ending." His breath touched my cheek like a vow half-spoken. "Say yes," he said, "not to me only, to what calls you, to what we are when we are not afraid." The far door opened. Figures poured in, important in the way people are when they believe they understand what is happening. They slowed when they saw us. Not scandal, not triumph, confusion, the honest kind that has to choose quickly what story to tell itself. The Alpha stepped half a pace in front of me without breaking our line of breath, a shield that did not block my view. I could see over his shoulder the calculation passing from face to face like a coin. "Remember," he said so low that only my pulse heard him, "you are not here to be owned. You are here to be answered." I felt the shape of my answer before I found its sound. I turned my face just enough that the edge of his jaw grazed my temple, and the world narrowed to the warmth of him and the cool silk at my throat and the bright, patient circle under our feet. "Yes," I said, and this time the word was not a hinge but a vow. We did not move much. The world moved around us. If the house had been a kinder god, he would have kissed me. Instead, he pressed his brow to mine, and in that touch I learned that sometimes skin is a more articulate language than lips. For a handful of heartbeats, long enough to change the map but not the names, the mansion forgot to be a cage and remembered to be a doorway. The night leaned in to listen. The hall seemed to hold its breath after my answer. The yes that slipped from my lips was not just a sound, it was a seal, a key turning in invisible locks. The torches bent as if hidden winds had reached them, and the circle of stones glowed brighter, engraving a pale brand into the floor that I knew would remain long after we were gone. But what terrified and fascinated me was that it wasn't only the house that had answered. It was him, The alpha still held my hand, and the firm strength that once felt like a prison now felt like sustenance, a steadiness that kept me upright while everything else tried to sway or break. His golden gaze was no longer only the cold appraisal of a predator. Something soft flickered through it. Pain remembered, desire barely leashed, and recognition so clear it robbed me of speech. I should have pulled away. Instead, I listened to the new language our bodies were writing. The tremor, where our fingers laced. The hush that fell over portraits that had always watched. The shadow at the wall tilting its head like a wary animal choosing, for once, not to hunt. Fear did not leave me. It changed its shape. It narrowed to a single point that burned lower in my chest, where want lives. I realized with a certainty that scared me more than any threat that I was not only being judged here. I was being chosen, and I was choosing back. He stepped closer the way a tide moves, slow, inevitable, patient as the moon. He leaned in as if he were deliberately breaking a vow he had made with his own bones. His forehead touched mine, and for an instant the mansion dissolved. Carved doors forgot to creak. Chandeliers forgot to glitter. Even the table that had swallowed oaths for centuries forgot its iron appetite. There was only the two of us, and the small weather our bodies made, a hush of heat and breath, and the sharpened sound of my heart answering his. "You think I am your sentence?" he whispered, his voice grazing the shape of my mouth without quite claiming it. "But perhaps I am your chance." The words slid into me like a key into an old lock, turning with the stubborn ease of something that has waited years to fit. My resolve faltered. His fingers traveled along my cheek, steady, tender, and terribly dangerous. And the resistance I had worn like armor melted the way ice surrenders to a hand that refuses to let go. I should have stepped back. Instead, I moved closer. The first touch of his lips was brief and careful, as if the house itself would punish us for daring joy. But that spare touch was enough to light 1,000 small fires under my skin. The floor hummed. The stones pulsed in a circle of quickened light. The shadow rose and then retreated, not in defeat, but in a grudging courtesy I had never expected to see. The kiss deepened not as conquest, but as recognition. Like discovering a word we had both been circling for years and finally daring to speak it aloud. He sought me with hunger reined by care, a man testing the edges of a miracle he did not trust to last. I answered with a hunger educated by fear, a woman who had learned to survive by saying no and now found that yes could be another way to live. Our mouths learned the measure of each other the way hands learn a tool polished by generations. The fit felt older than my memories, like a road rediscovered in a forest I had been taught to avoid. Heat gathered where our chests met, a sternum-to-sternum vow that asked for nothing and promised everything. When at last he drew back half a breath, his eyes were not the unblinking gold of command, but the unguarded light of a man looking at the one thing he had sworn never to want again. "Now you understand why there can be no return," he said, and the steadiness in his tone was not pride. It was truth carrying its own weight. I didn't answer with words. My hands had already confessed, fisting in his shirt and pulling him closer, refusing the distance that used to feel like safety. He let me. The emphasis of that permission was gentler than any vow and heavier than any chain. His heartbeat lost its regimented pace and stumbled into a human rhythm against my ribs. His scent, rain on stone, clean iron, a hint of wild fur, folded into my breath until breathing felt like something we built together, one steady brick at a time. He did not devour me. He steadied me. "If I claim you," he murmured, "they will call it theft. If I refuse you, they will call it weakness. They will write their names over our truth either way." His thumb traced the neat edge of my jaw, and beneath the gold of his skin I saw the pale rope of an old scar. An oath he had once carved into himself to keep from ever saying mine again. "I kept that vow," he added, eyes closing as if returning to long corridors of restraint, "until you stepped across my threshold and the house remembered your name before you spoke it." The circle steadied into a calmer glow. Not a glare, but a patient halo that asked only that we not lie. He drew me in, not to conquer, but to shelter. And in that shelter, I felt the world tilt into its rightful angle. I thought of all the rules I had carried like stones in my pockets and pictured, with a quiet that surprised me, the precise moment I let them fall. If they decide for us, I said, hearing my own voice as if for the first time, let them decide after seeing us as we are, not as they fear we are. He exhaled a thin, resigned sound that seeded secrecy but not defeat. He lifted our joined hands like an offering, not to the council or the house, but to the stubborn truth we had woken, and asked, almost gently, "Say yes again." I did. Not as a hinge this time, but as a vow. The portraits leaned back into their frames. The shadow resumed its quiet watch. Somewhere deep in the mansion, a careful hush of many feet seemed to gather itself like weather behind a closed door. We had not chosen safety. We had chosen clarity. And clarity, I was learning, invites opposition. Yet even as the air cooled and the circle dimmed to patient embers, I found that desire had taught my fear its manners. I could still be afraid and still choose him. I pressed my brow to his, allowed myself the dangerous luxury of a final truth said aloud and meant with my whole. Awakened blood, whatever story they write, it will not be our ending. His answering breath touched my mouth like the beginning of a second kiss, and in that suspended heartbeat, before the world remembered its interruptions, the night felt wide enough to keep our promise alive. I did not pretend the house would forgive us for this mercy. The mansion had the memory of a cathedral and the temper of a fortress, and both had taught it to resent softness. I felt it in the subtle way the temperature changed, in the minute contraction of the circle's glow, in the way distant hinges settled as if bracing for witnesses. Yet even the house could not deny the plain arithmetic of my body answering his. The steadier breath, the loosened fists, the way my fear found its place like a reprimanded child and sat down to listen. I thought of the market where my father counted coins until dawn, of the storm that swallowed my mother's lullabies, of the papers with cold signatures and colder smiles, and I understood that every debt they had ever written me into had been a story about scarcity. This was not. This was an act of abundance disguised as defiance, a refusal to starve where there was bread in reach. If I step back now, I told him, it will be because I am afraid of other people's names for what I feel, and I am tired of letting their names live where my truth should be. His mouth softened at the corners, a shadow of laughter visiting a face that had forgotten the habit. I have worn many names, he answered, and most of them were warnings. But the first one I ever wanted was not Alpha. It was yours. The syllables of my name, the older version the house had used, moved through me like a draft in a closed room. And somewhere inside, something that had been holding its breath for years finally took air. He did not rush my courage. He let it arrive the way morning arrives in winter, blue-edged, careful, testing every surface. I studied him as one studies a map that offers more than a single way out. The small white seam of a scar at his wrist, the fine tremor that visited his mouth when he was very near and entirely unafraid, the discipline in his shoulders straining to contain a tenderness that embarrassed him more than rage ever had. If I kiss you again, he said, I will not ask the house's permission. Good, I said, and meant it. The second kiss did not bargain. It did not apologize. It gathered the scattered proofs of us, the heat where our bodies met, the steadiness of our hands, the unlocked rhythm of breath, and wrote them into a single sentence the room could not misread. The glow along the stones settled to a slow, approving pulse like a great creature falling back to sleep. In the distant corridors, a draft turned a corner and remembered our names. The portraits, briefly, looked less like judges and more like witnesses. When we finally came up for air, I did not step away. I placed my palm over his heart and felt the shape of a life that had been all edges soften under my touch. Whatever follows, I said, I will not pretend this was a mistake. His answering breath touched my lips like a promise signed with heat. We stood there, two fugitives from our own pasts, and let the moment make a small, stubborn country around us, bordered by our bodies, defended by our honesty, named by a word we had both been taught to fear and had now learned to speak without flinching. Us. The clearing received us like a cathedral without walls, moonlight for stained glass, the hush of pines for a choir. For a breath, the world was only wind and us, the aftertaste of the circle still warm in our mouths. Then the forest remembered what hunted in its shadows. The night tightened. Branches traded secrets. Far behind, the mansion's bells, silent for a century, shivered once, as if announcing the verdict we had stolen from its throat. "They will come," he said, "not as a threat, but as an accounting. And they will come certain." He looked at me the way a man looks at a harbor after surviving a storm. Grateful, terrified, unwilling to turn back. "I can face them alone," he added, a lie dressed in protection. "You can run." "I have been running my entire life," I answered, and the truth of it made my lungs feel new. From debts with other people's names, from oaths I never swore, from the sound of myself. I took his hand. The warmth of him felt like a decision I had already made and would make again. No more. The first shapes broke from the tree line. Black coats slick as oil, silver sigils catching moonlight, eyes bright with a creed older than mercy. The elder with the cane did not look winded. He looked satisfied, like a mathematician arriving at a proof he had rehearsed since youth. "Return what you took," he said to the Alpha, voice cold enough to frostbark. "Return the rule you broke." The Alpha stepped forward, a wall that moved, the gold in his eyes like banked flame. "What I took was mine in the way a dawn is mine," he said. "It arrives whether or not you permit it." "Then the city will bleed," the elder said simply. He raised the cane. The sigil at its head, 3 lines, always 3, woke with a sullen glow. All around him metal side free of leather. And her first. I felt the fear arrive. It came honest, with cold hands and a clear voice. But the fear did not find me empty this time. It found me held. I stepped up beside the Alpha until our shoulders touched. "I am done being the object in other people's sentences," I told the elder. "Write a new grammar." He smiled as if I had confirmed his worst suspicions. "She talks like a door." "Because she is one," the Alpha said, and the forest seemed to lean nearer to hear. "A gate chosen, not bought. You mistook scarcity for law and called it tradition. Steel left scabbard. Boots bit earth. The first rank advanced." "On me," the Alpha breathed, but I shook my head. "With you." The night broke. They came like winter, disciplined, relentless, certain of their weather, and met a storm they had not calculated. The Alpha moved with the economy of a final draft. No flourish, no waste. Where he stepped, the world clarified. Where his hands found steel, steel remembered its ore and shook. I stayed at his left shoulder, where the circle's glow had once braided with my breath, and discovered that courage can be a posture more than a roar. The first blade glanced off a current of air I did not command, but understood. The way hands understand heat without needing to see the flame. The second never reached us. The third learned the shape of the ground. "Do you feel it?" he asked between the arithmetic of strikes. "Yes." I did not know what I meant and meant it anyway. The elder lifted the cane and drew a shape that had no business existing. The old sigil. Multiplied, knotted into a net. The clearing dimmed. The moon seemed to forget its name. "You untied what should have slept," he told me, almost kindly. "Do you have any idea what the city will ask in return?" "I know what it asked of my father," I said, and the memory of the small market rose like a bruise. "I know what it took from my mother, and I know what you tried to take from me." I stepped forward until the cane's light colored my skin white as salt. "Here is my return." I spoke my name the way the house had spoken it. Old, unafraid, the first music of me. The air accepted it like a key. The net sagged. The moon remembered itself and poured silver back into the world. The elder's eyes widened, not in fear, but in the grief of understanding. "So that's where it went," he whispered. "All these years, hidden in the blood we taxed." The Alpha's hand closed over mine and lifted it as if it were a banner. "Not hidden," he said. "Kept." What happened next did not look like magic. It looked like relief arriving after a long siege. The ground ceased bracing for impact. The pines unclenched. In the city beyond, dogs stopped their anxious pacing and lay down. And the men in black, their certainty faltered. Some lowered their weapons. Some looked at the elder as if the equation had changed and he had forgotten to tell them when. "Stand," the elder ordered, but the word landed tired. He raised the cane as if to restart the world by force. The Alpha stepped between us and the strike that would have followed. The blow found his shoulder. He did not make a sound, but the sound happened anyway, the kind the earth makes when a tree you love splits in a storm. I caught him before he fell because some promises you don't speak. You demonstrate, you see? The elder said almost gently. Your chance costs. It always costs. Yes, I answered. I kissed the Alpha's temple and tasted iron and rain. And I am done letting other people choose the price. I turned back to the elder. The fear tried one last time to be my author. I thanked it for its service and set it down. You think law is a wall, I told him? It is also a door. I lifted my free hand and drew the shape the circle had been teaching me since the first pulse. 12 marks. Not hours, but phases, linked by a line that returned to its beginning without apology. The clearing brightened, not to blind, but to clarify, and the sigils on the council's coats showed their seams. They were not commands. They were agreements. And agreements can be re-signed. The net fell apart like old lace. The elder looked smaller without its shadow. If you rewrite this, he said, voice raw for the first time, you must keep the city safe. You must open and close the right gates. I will, I said, and felt the truth arrive with weight. We will. I looked at the Alpha. Pain carved its map across his shoulder, but his eyes were bright with a light that was not only gold. It was faith, reluctant, incredulous, stubborn. The elder bowed his head the width of a sigh, as if placing a tired crown on a new head. Then I rescind the hunt, he said. He let the cane fall. It struck earth like the end of a sentence that had been too long. And I retire from a war I no longer understand. He turned away. One by one, the others followed, their black dissolving among the trunks, their boots forgetting to sound like verdicts. The clearing refilled with the normal night, crickets stitching their little hours, wind counting branches, the pulse of our breathing learning its calm. I looked down at my hands, at the trembling that set in when the arithmetic of danger finished. The Alpha swayed and I caught him again. This time he let me keep him. It will scar, I said, touching the wound lightly. Then it will be part of the map, he answered, and tried to smile. It didn't quite reach his mouth, but it reached me. I tore a strip from the hem of my dress and bound the shoulder the way my mother had bound skinned knees in summers that now felt like stories. He watched my hands as if they were scripture. What now? I asked. It felt like the first useful question I had ever asked in my life. Now, he said, we write. He nodded toward the city, where roofs gleamed like folded wings. New rules, not to cage, to keep, not to hoard, to hold. He lifted our joined hands. We do the work tradition forgot. We tell the truth out loud. The moon dropped 3 fingers lower. Dawn began its quiet rehearsal in the east. I listened for fear and found only a narrow sweetness, like the last string of a harp still vibrating after the song. I turned to him. And us? He took the question as if it weighed something and found that his palms were made for it. Us, he said, and the word did not tremble. He leaned, cautious of the bandage, and pressed his brow to mine the way he had in the circle, not as a claim, but as a promise. We learn. We fail without lying. We kiss like people who survived what wanted us silent. I laughed, quiet at first, then surprised at its own courage. The sound startled a pair of birds from a lower branch. They lifted all at once like a spell canceling itself. There will be more councils, I warned. There will, he agreed. But there will also be more doors. He nodded to my hands. And you already know how to open them. We stood until the east remembered gold. When we finally walked, we walked together, not toward the mansion that had tried to keep our names, but toward the city that would need them. The path did not appear. It admitted it had been there all along. Behind us, the clearing held our secrets the way water holds stars, gently, without pretending to own them. At the tree line, he stopped and looked back only once. Whatever story they wrote, he said softly, this is our ending. It is, I answered, and felt the gate in my chest swing wide and settle true. The wind moved through the pines like a benediction. The bells in the mansion did not ring again.